have this? Of course.
I'm sure you're familiar with this clip from the 1930 film Morocco, featuring the Hays Code-defying lesbian kiss from cross-dressed queer icon Marlene Dietrich. It is the immediate example of lesbian and pre-Hays Code cinema for a reason. The queerness is not even remotely hiding. It's right there in the open for all to see in a mainstream American film. Laura Horak states that Dietrich's Amy Joy is often characterized as one of the lone early representations of women cross-dressing and expressing desire for other women in American cinema. And yet, in the silent era, queer cinema flourished, with examples of overt lesbianism present in many films, such as Midwife to the Upper Class, Pandora's Box, and A Florida Enchantment. While by modern standards of queer representation, these films may be found lacking, lesbians continued to be quietly present in cinema all the way up until the Hays Code began to be enforced in 1934. Bradbury Rance writes, whilst the motion picture production code inevitably paired homosexuality with prohibition, Yorgos argues that invisibility is an inevitable condition of lesbianism in the visual field to begin with, rather than a symptom of stalled progress to be redressed. This invisible visibility is a phenomenon unique to lesbians compared to other queer folk, especially gay men. Where gay men were persecuted under sodomy and indecency laws, women were left out altogether. In her 2002 book Inconsequence, Lesbian Representation and the Logic of Sexual Sequence, Anne-Marie Yorgos states that female homosexuality has been ambivalently constituted in relation to logics of vision. It is less the subject of prohibition than of an incredulousness that would deny the space of its possibility. However, invisible visibility is a good way to explain why all these lesbians were able to be included in early cinema at all. Because it's not actually illegal or immoral or anything. Women don't even want sex, so how could they be sexual creatures in the absence of a man, right? Or as Yorgos puts it, what do lesbians do in bed? In her article, Spectacular Failure, The Figure of the Lesbian in Mulholland Drive, Heather Love argues that Lynch is working wholly with lesbian stereotypes and cliches. He gives the audience both kinds of lesbian that they've seen before and can comprehend. She writes, in the romance between Betty and Rita, Lynch presents lesbianism in its innocent and expansive form. Lesbian desire appears as one big adventure, an entree into glamorous and unknown territory. In the story of Diane and Camilla, Lynch offers us a classic lesbian triangle, in which an attractive but unavailable woman dumps a less attractive woman who is figured as exclusively lesbian. Love also comments on the invisible visibility idea, stating that lesbianism is culturally understood as simultaneously the hottest thing on earth and something fundamentally sad and not at all erotic. Speaking on Love's essay, Bradbury Rance compares the way Mulholland Drive uses lesbians to Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan. Both films use the visual double to represent the competitive nature of Hollywood in Mulholland Drive and the ballet company in Black Swan. The sex scene in Black Swan is an interesting use of the evil sexual lesbian corrupting the innocent virginal woman trope. Nina and Lily, the white swan and the black swan, the lesbian threat and the innocent, and yet, Nina is all of these things. She is both the black swan and the white swan. She is the lesbian threat and the innocent. The second lesbian cliché presented by Lynch in Mulholland Drive is the lesbian tragedy, the love triangle in which the true lesbian will be betrayed in favour of a man, the undoing of Diane in the second act of Mulholland Drive. This trope, however, is refreshingly defied in the Wachowski sisters' 1996 neo-noir thriller, Bound. Bound has every element of the tragic love triangle trope, and yet it manages to defy audience expectation in every way. As Chris Strayer puts it in his essay, it is a neo-noir built on the romance and gangster genres that is able to push gender revisions and give lesbians a happy ending, driving away into the sunset in their brand new red truck. Everything about Bound defies cultural cliches in the best possible way. Violet is not undone or punished for her sexual endeavours, even with men. Similarly, Corky isn't the cold, emotionally mannish butch, and is given a rich arc where she comes to understand and validate Violet, rather than their different lesbian experiences being their undoing. Up until this point, the lesbian in film has been characterized by sexuality. She is either the sexual predator or the innocent victim, the gold star or the man-loving betrayer. It is an almost masculine approach to a relationship that is defined by its absence of a man. And yet in the 2010s, we swing the pendulum the opposite way in favor of longing glances and tragic endings. Enter the lesbian period drama. Todd Haynes' Carol is the prime example of a lesbian period drama. It is defined by its quiet feminine tragedy, led by its intense nonverbal characterization. As Bradbury Rance puts it, Carol's erotic and romantic potential is largely generated from a series of looks and fleeting touches. Dialogue is often punctuated by adamantly silent moments of intense looking. At first glance, the relationship between Carol and Therese is recognisable as a subsection of the predatory lesbian and virginal lesbian trope, i.e. the active mother and the passive daughter. The older character Carol plays the active part in the relationship, playing the seductress, while Therese is the innocent young woman. However, in this film, neither character is truly in charge. Rather, they both play off one another's subtle glances and touches, exploring what sexual and romantic intimacy is allowed and what isn't. Bradbury Rance comments on the scene in which Carol invites Therese to smell her perfume. A guy is meant to initiate appropriate physical intimacy, as opposed to a potential female Oedipal reading, in which Therese is not only daughter but doll. The sex scene also shows a true equality and understanding between the characters. It is not wholly initiated by either one, but they almost meet each other halfway in their suggestion. And yet this picturesque act of intimacy between them is met by almost immediate discovery and the threat of being outed. The physical intimacy acts as a goodbye of sorts, as the perfect memory before the characters are yanked back into heteronormative reality. A similar scenario happens in several other films of the decade. Céline Sciamma's Portrait of a Lady on Fire, Isabel Coixet's Elisa and Marcela, and Francis Lee's Ammonite. The looming knowledge that there will be a return to the heteronormative defines Sciamma's Portrait of a Lady on Fire. The character of Eloise cannot be separated with the image of Eloise in the different portraits of her. As Bradbury Rance puts it, Eloise risks being absorbed into her painted image. The image that Sciamma creates is one that both produces desire and threatens to reveal it as an illusion, an image, and nothing more. Naturally, I have to add that this film once again fits into the lesbian love triangle trope. However, it neither succumbs to it nor frivolously defies it as Bound does. While Eloise and Mariana made to part, neither one of them is portrayed as the betrayer. Rather, it is the circumstances, the time period, the social expectations, that are the antagonistic force. This shift of antagonism makes for a way this trope can be used to effectively, albeit tragically, portray a lesbian relationship that is able to properly focus on the actual lesbians rather than the man who tears them apart.
You know what? I'm good, because it's not going to happen for me. If it's not happening here...
And we've arrived. Here we are in 2024 with a plethora of films targeted at the queer, political, brain-rotted, mentally ill demographic of Gen Z. While film and television has struggled to represent Gen Z in the past, the dark ages of Riverdale are over, because with Bottoms and Drive Away Dolls, the lesbian comedy boom is here. Emma Seligman's Bottoms takes the American high school comedy and, to quote Barbie, plays a little too hard with it, making it an absolutely delicious queer comedy. Bottoms does not ignore the two lesbian archetypes. However, for the two main lesbian characters in this film, PJ and Josie, their lesbian identities are not a hugely driving factor in their conflict. Rather, it is their flawed and extremely ambiguous morals that drive them into a web of lies. The lesbian characters are allowed to be protagonists we root for, but they're also allowed to be incredibly flawed and foolish. Seligman was well aware of this in the creation of these characters, stating in an interview that she didn't think they thought too hard about it. They just wanted them to be real, messy, and horny. And horny this film is. Not only does the premise of this film hinge on the main characters wanting to have sex with the pretty popular girls, but the film is full of crass humour. Similarly ridiculous and horny is the 2024 comedy Drive Away Dolls, directed by Ethan Coen. While for many people this film didn't hit the mark, Lucy Curtis sums it up in her review perfectly. She says, "This is a film not meant to be taken seriously. If you enter this movie with those expectations, you will be disappointed." And despite the lackluster response from critics, Drive Away Dolls manages to do a similar thing to Bottoms, where it allows the characters to be more than one thing. They're gay, and they're also idiots. But of course, the 2020s didn't invent the lesbian comedy. In fact, the cult classic directed by Jamie Babbit, But I'm a Cheerleader, and Angela Robinson's Debs have many of the same qualities. They are unserious and lighthearted while simultaneously providing lesbian representation to a young adult and teenage audience. But I'm a Cheerleader is a particularly impressive case, as it manages to be whimsical in its tone and visuals while dealing with themes of self-discovery, heteronormativity, and the very real and very serious issue of conversion therapy. As Cameron Palmer states in a review of the film, while the characters are one-dimensional and the plot follows typical formulas in the genre, like Enemies to Lovers, it's self-aware, playing into these expectations to subvert them. Life and art imitate one another, and the lesbian comedies being made are proof of that. We are reveling in an unprecedented era of freedom, both in real life and online, and that lightheartedness is reflected in the films being created. That's not to say that things are perfect, but it is to say that things are hopeful. In conclusion, the representation of lesbians in cinema has evolved significantly, moving from bold portrayals in early silent cinema and all the way back to bold portrayals in modern comedies. Even though there are common threads that link each of these periods, all the way up until the current day, lesbians have and will continue to defy the tropes and standards and rules that society and cinema alike place upon them. Their shared culture, experiences, and history makes their stories unique and ever suited to the screen. As audiences continue to seek authenticity, depth, and honesty in representation, lesbian cinema has a bright future, backed by a beautiful, complex past.